I never imagined my first home would be anything more than a place to catch my breath after nearly a decade of renting. I was 29, single, and working full-time as a dental insurance coordinator. After pinching every penny for over 6 years and living in the cheapest apartments I could find, I'd finally saved enough for a down payment on a humble 2-bedroom ranch in a small town just outside Knoxville, Tennessee. It didn't sparkle. The siding was worn, the bushes were wild, and the roof had a sagging patch that needed attention, but it was mine. My parents drove down from Ohio the weekend I moved in. They helped me unload the U-Haul, filled my pantry with essentials, and then made the trip back north. That Sunday night, I stood barefoot in the middle of my living room with a half-unpacked box of dishes beside me and a frozen pizza sizzling in the oven. I remember thinking, this is it. This is home. I'd taken a week off work to settle in. During those days I met a few of the neighbors, most of them elderly. Directly next door was Mrs. Langdon, a soft-spoken widow who handed me a tin of snickerdoodles the day we met. Across the street lived Darren and Elise, a young couple with a baby boy they took on long stroller walks each morning. They invited me to a barbecue the first weekend I was there. The whole neighborhood had that quiet, nod and smile kind of friendliness that made me feel at ease, except for the house at the end of the street. It stood out in all the wrong ways: peeling green paint, thick layers of newspapers collecting on the porch, a crumpled section of gutter dangling like a broken limb. I figured it was abandoned or maybe owned by someone who didn't care. I didn't think twice until I saw someone come out of it. It was around 9:30 p.m. during my first week when there was a knock at my door. Not a doorbell, just 3 slow, measured thuds. I hesitated. I wasn't expecting anyone. I peeked through the peephole and saw a man, early 50s maybe, with a bald crown, a scruffy gray beard, and a faded flannel shirt. He was hunched a bit, like someone who'd spent his life doing heavy outdoor work. When he saw me at the door, he smiled. "Evenin'," he said. "Sorry to knock so late. Name's Roger. I live down at the end. You just moved in, yeah?" I opened the door halfway, keeping one hand on the frame. "Yeah," I said cautiously. "Just got here last week." He nodded and looked past me into the house. "Welcome. This place used to belong to a lady named Margaret. Lived here a long time till she passed. Nice to see it lived in again." I thanked him and started nudging the door closed. But he raised a hand. "Look, I hate to ask," he said, lifting a large blue bucket, the kind you'd mop a floor with. "My water got shut off earlier today. Any chance you'd fill this for me?" It was an odd request, but his voice was gentle, and something about the situation made it hard to say no. I'd been raised to help neighbors when I could. "Sure," I said, taking the bucket. "Just give me a sec." I filled it in the bathtub and handed it back. He thanked me and shuffled off. That might have been the end of it, but it wasn't. Over the next several nights, Roger kept coming back. One night he asked if I had any extra canned vegetables. Another night he said his flashlight batteries died and asked if I had any spares. Once, near midnight, he knocked asking for bandages, said he'd cut his hand on a fence nail. Each time he looked a bit worse. Dirt under his nails, eyes sunken, clothes wrinkled and stained. What started as neighborly concern slowly shifted to unease. Not just because of what he asked for, but because of how comfortable he seemed showing up. Eventually, I started making excuses. "Sorry, I'm out. Can't help tonight." Then I stopped answering the door altogether. But the knocking didn't stop. Always 3 knocks. Always the same slow rhythm. Sometimes at 10 p.m., other times closer to 1 a.m. I thought about telling someone, but what would I even say? A man asked for canned beans and now I'm scared? It all came to a head on a Wednesday night. It was just before midnight. I heard the now familiar 3 knocks. I almost ignored it, until I looked through the peephole. Roger's face was different. He looked panicked. His breathing was heavy, and he kept glancing behind him. Against my better judgment, I opened the door a crack. "Sorry," he said, his voice shaking. "Look, I just got a new propane grill, but I think I hooked it up wrong. I smell gas. Can you check it for me? Just want to make sure it's not dangerous." "You want me to come to your house right now?" I asked. I wouldn't ask, but I'm worried it could go up in flames. I don't trust myself to tell. I hesitated. My gut screamed no, but guilt and concern tangled inside me. What if there really was a leak? "I'll be over in a minute," I said. I put on shoes, grabbed my phone, and followed the sidewalk toward his house. His yard was worse up close, broken plastic chairs, an old grill rusting in the grass. His front door was open, but the house was dark. "Out back," he called. "It's in the yard." I stepped through the gate. There was no grill, no propane tank, just a patch of dirt and a tipped-over wheelbarrow. "Roger?" I called. "Yeah, I moved it into the basement. Wanted to keep it safe. Come help me carry it back up." Basement. The word hit me like ice. I stepped cautiously toward the back door. "You got a light?" I asked. "Nah. Switch busted. Just come on. I'm right down here." I didn't move. "Roger," I said, backing away. "I think I'll call someone to check it out. If it's dangerous." Then silence. Then thump, thump, thump. Footsteps. Sprinting. Coming up the basement stairs. I ran. Full speed through the gate, down the street, back to my house. I slammed the door, locked both bolts, and grabbed a kitchen knife. I watched through the window for half an hour. Nothing. I didn't sleep. I considered calling the police, but what could I say? My neighbor invited me into his dark house and ran at me from the basement. A few days passed. No knocks. No sign of Roger. Finally, I mentioned it to Mrs. Langdon. I told her about the man at the end of the block. Her face wrinkled in confusion. "Roger," she said. "Sweetheart, no one lives in that house. It's been empty since Mr. Lawrence passed 2 years ago." My mouth went dry. "No," I said. "He told me he lives there. I've spoken to him." She shook her head. "Honey, that place doesn't have power or water. It's condemned." I told her everything. She called the police. They found no one. No furniture. No grill. No food. No bed. The back door was still open. The basement walls had deep scratch marks, like something or someone had tried to claw their way out. I was desperate. That's really where it started. When you're low on money, out of options, and clinging to the kind of hope that makes you ignore warning signs because they're the only things flapping in the breeze, well, that's when mistakes happen. It was the summer before my sophomore year of college. I just lost the student housing lottery and ended up back in my hometown, a quiet Midwestern place called Fairgrove. It was pretty in autumn and scorching in July. I was scrambling to figure out where I'd live come fall. My university, Terrell Ridge State, didn't allow second-year students to stay in the dorms unless you had a medical exemption. I didn't, so I needed an apartment. The trouble was, off-campus housing near Terrell Ridge was a nightmare. Overpriced or falling apart, no in-between. I had enough saved from working concessions at the local movie theater to cover a deposit, but monthly rent? No way I could swing it alone. So I did what any broke, overly hopeful 19-year-old would do. I posted an ad on the campus classifieds and Craigslist. Roommate needed ASAP. Responsible, clean, full-time student. Looking to split rent on a 2-bedroom near campus. Quiet, non-smoker. Message if interested. It was honest. Nothing fancy. I posted it around 9:20 p.m., then went to make instant mac and cheese. At 10 p.m., I had one response. Her name was Iris Whitmore. She wrote in short, polite sentences. Said she was recently retired and looking for a smaller place since her husband had passed earlier that year. I hesitated at her age. She said she was 71, but her message was gentle. She liked students, she said. Liked quiet. She'd pay half the rent without issue and wouldn't be a bother. I didn't get any other responses that week. By the time classes started again in September, Iris and I had signed a lease for a modest brick duplex 5 blocks from campus. It had old windows, squeaky floors, and yellowing blinds, but it was clean and peaceful. There was a small front porch and a giant maple out front that shaded the living room in the afternoons. Iris was tiny, maybe 5 feet tall, with silver hair always tied into a neat bun. She wore long skirts and buttoned sweaters, even in the heat. She smelled like lavender and always spoke softly. She moved in with just one box and a battered suitcase. I don't believe in clutter, she told me. She took the smaller bedroom in the back. I got the one with the bay window. Said she didn't watch TV and would mostly read or do puzzles in her room. And for the first few weeks, she was exactly what I hoped for in a roommate. Quiet, respectful, almost invisible. I'd come home from class, make dinner, and maybe hear her boiling water for tea or walking to the bathroom. Sometimes she'd pass through the kitchen and say something like "long day" or "that smells lovely." Always polite, always soft-spoken. But then things changed. The first thing I noticed was the laughter. It started one night while I was working on a paper in the living room. I heard a high-pitched giggle coming from her room. It caught me off guard, not because she was laughing, but because it didn't sound like her. It was girlish, light. I figured maybe she was on the phone, but it didn't stop. No conversation. No second voice. Just these sharp little bursts of laughter, like someone watching something only they could see. It happened again the next night. And the next. No talking. No movement. Just that strange laughter. The second thing was the staring. I started catching her watching me. She'd stand at the edge of the hallway, half in shadow, hands folded lightly in front of her like a librarian waiting for a question. She wouldn't speak, wouldn't move, just stare from the edge of the dark hallway. I'd look up and say, "Hey, Iris," and she'd nod slowly, then disappear back down the hall. By mid-October, I couldn't ignore the unease anymore. One night around 3 a.m., I woke up to tapping. Not knocking, tapping. Soft, rhythmic, like someone drumming their fingers just above a whisper. It was coming from my bedroom door. I sat up, heart thudding. I didn't say anything at first, just listened. Tap, tap, tap. "Iris?" I whispered. The tapping stopped. Then I heard it, laughter. That same high-pitched giggle, right outside my door. My skin went cold. I didn't move for what felt like hours. I couldn't. And my door didn't have a lock. The next morning, I tried to bring it up casually. "Hey, Iris, were you up late last night?" She looked up from her mug. "No, dear. I went to bed early." I nodded slowly. I thought I heard someone tapping on my door. She smiled too wide. "Dreams can be awfully loud, can't they?" That was the last time I tried to talk to her about it. That night, I pushed my desk in front of my bedroom door. Just in case. At 3:12 a.m., I woke up to the doorknob rattling. Not tapping. Not knocking. Turning. Someone was trying to open it. I stayed silent. My breath held. I could see the desk nudging forward slightly with each twist. Then it stopped. I thought maybe she'd gone back to her room. And then I saw it, and I pressed into the narrow space between the door and the frame. Watching me. Not blinking. Just staring into the room. Then she screamed. It was sudden, sharp, like someone being burned. She screamed my name, screamed nonsense. "You shouldn't be here." Then she started slamming against the door. The desk shook with each hit. I jumped up and pressed into it, yelling for her to stop. She kept screaming. Then silence. I called the police. When they arrived, I didn't know how to explain. My roommate tried to break down my bedroom door. Was all I could manage. They took it seriously. When they opened the door, I nearly vomited. Every single kitchen knife we owned had been stabbed into the wood. Some were buried deep. Others barely hanging. It looked like a pincushion made of steel. Iris didn't answer her door at first. One of the officers knocked while the other stood beside me as I explained what had been happening. The giggling, the staring, the whispers. She didn't go quietly. When they finally got her out, she screamed about voices, blood in the walls, and demons in the pipes. She didn't look at me once. I moved out within the month. I found a small place across town with 2 other students. It was cramped, but I never felt safer. I never saw Iris again. A few weeks later, an officer followed up. He mentioned something I hadn't expected. "There's no record of her," he said. "No ID. No family. The name she gave you, Iris Whitmore, it doesn't exist in our system." The landlord said she'd answered his ad with cash up front. No background check. At first, it was just a creak. The kind you'd expect in a terrace house built in the late 1800s. My town, Darrowfield, isn't the kind of place you find on postcards. It's a tangle of red brick homes stitched together by narrow lanes, leaning fences, and rusted garden sheds. Chimneys like crooked teeth, windows that don't quite align. In the middle of it all was 18 Millport Lane. Home for 3 years. I moved in after a breakup. I wanted quiet, space, and honestly cheap rent. The 2-bedroom house was modest. Threadbare carpet, a fireplace that didn't work, a damp spot near the front window that never fully dried. But it was mine. My name's Lena Carver. I was 28 when everything happened. I worked admin at a local orthopedic clinic. Monday through Friday, 9 to 5. Nothing thrilling. My black lab, Theo, was my closest company. A gentle giant with a bark that could rattle windows. After the breakup, my social life shrank. I didn't mind. The quiet suited me. Millport Lane was mostly still. Old couples, young families, a few single renters like myself. Then there was the neighbor at number 20. That was Malcolm. He lived alone. Mid-40s, maybe older. Balding, with thick glasses and a preference for shapeless cardigans, even in August. I never saw him with guests. He didn't seem to work. He'd sit on his stoop rolling cigarettes with yellowed fingers, watching the street like he was logging every movement. Not curious, just observant in a way that made your skin itch. We shared nods, not conversations. The first month passed without incident. Then came the noises. It started in the bathroom. A faint bump from the ceiling above the tub. Nothing dramatic, just a shuffle or thud now and then. I figured it was a bird or squirrel that had slipped in under the loose roof tiles. The attic hatch was outside the bathroom, in the upstairs hall. I'd only ever looked up there once after moving in. Just dusty beams, insulation, and a few old boards. Nothing that felt worth revisiting. One night, I was soaking in the tub after a long shift. Candles lit. Theo curled beside the door. Then I heard it again. A creak from above. Then silence. Theo growled. Low. Uncertain. I sat up. Probably just a pigeon, I muttered more to myself than him. I asked my friend Jamie to check the attic that weekend. He brought his torch, climbed halfway up, and scanned the space. Just cobwebs and dead air, he said, joking. I laughed. We moved on. Weeks passed. Then came the Friday night in October. I was running late for a friend's birthday down at the pub. Just out of the shower, towel drying my hair, when Theo started barking. Not his usual bark either. This was sharp, insistent, protective. I rushed out to find him frozen in the hallway, tail stiff, eyes locked on the ceiling above the bathroom. Exactly where the noises had come from. Theo? I asked carefully. He didn't move. Then I heard it. A scrape. Deliberate. Like something heavy being dragged across wood. Too slow for an animal. Too intentional. My whole body went still. My breath caught. I grabbed my phone and whispered to a friend that I'd be coming over early. I threw on clothes and left. Theo practically pulled me down the path. I didn't sleep well that night. The next morning, I was outside watering the front garden, trying to shake it off, when I heard Malcolm's voice. You doing all right? He called. I turned to see him sitting on his steps, same cardigan, same unreadable face. Yeah, I said, forcing a smile. I turned to go back inside when he added, Did you make it to your mate's place in time? I stopped. Sorry? Last night, he said casually. Heard you say you were getting ready at her place. My heart dropped. I hadn't said that outside. I hadn't even said it near a window. I'd whispered it into the phone from the hallway. I nodded stiffly. Yeah, I did. I locked the door behind me. I called my dad. Within an hour, he, my uncle, and cousin were at the house. We didn't want to confront anyone. We just wanted to know what was going on. We turned on the bathroom light, left the rest of the house dim. Then we opened the attic hatch. At first, nothing. Then I saw them, 2 pinpricks of light coming from the ceiling directly above the tub. Not visible unless you were standing directly under them. 2 tiny holes. We turned off the bathroom light. In the dark above, the holes glowed faintly. Light filtering in from the attic. Like eyes. My cousin climbed into the crawl space. He was quiet for a long stretch. When he came back down, he said, The wall between your attic and his. It's broken. Someone knocked bricks out. The rubble's on your side. My dad's face went pale. He stormed across the lane and pounded on Malcolm's door. Open up, he shouted. You've got no right. No answer. We called the police. They searched the attic and confirmed the break. But Malcolm denied everything. Said he hadn't been up there. Blamed the damage on previous tenants. Said he didn't even own a flashlight. There's no solid proof, one officer told me quietly. We can't arrest someone for construction damage. Maybe not, but there were holes in my ceiling. And someone knew things they shouldn't have. I didn't sleep in that house again. I packed a bag and moved back in with my parents that weekend. I returned only during daylight hours to collect my things. Never alone. Malcolm moved out 6 months later. The letting agent told me the property had unexpected water damage in the attic and was no longer rentable. Years later, I still think about that night. About the scrape above the ceiling. About Theo's growl. About Malcolm's voice saying he'd heard me whisper. And I wonder what would have happened if I'd stayed in the tub just a little longer. Or if I hadn't listened to my dog. Or if I hadn't listened to my gut. I don't look at attic hatches the same way anymore. I was 20 when I received my acceptance email to study psychology at Aldershire University. I remember standing in my bedroom in Mumbai, phone shaking in my hand, texting my best friend in all caps. It wasn't just about a degree, it was a way out. Home had become unbearable. My parents' arguments had grown louder, more constant, like background static I couldn't turn down. I needed distance. Aldershire wasn't in a big city. It was tucked away in a sleepy university town with ivy-covered buildings, buses that always ran a little late, and long rows of almost identical red brick houses. My first year was everything I'd hoped for. Student halls, shared kitchens that always smelled like burned toast and coffee, and new friends who felt like family. That's where I met Lena, Zoe, and Ben. We clicked instantly, late-night dance parties, cheap wine, crying over exam scores. By second year, we were ready for our own place. A real house, not something with thin walls and sticky kitchen counters. We found one through the university's housing program, a 2-story home at the very end of a terrace row on a street called Windmere Lane. It had a tiny backyard, a crooked wooden gate that opened into an alley, and a corner shop just 5 minutes away. My room was on the ground floor, window facing the back garden. Small but private. The neighbors on our left were older, quiet, polite, always gave a wave. On the right, though, was something else entirely. 5 guys, all students, all loud. Always up late, always drinking. Their music pulsed through our walls every weekend. Sometimes we'd see them out in the alley, smoking or yelling or both. One of them stood out, tall, buzz-cut, with eyes that didn't blink quite enough. We later learned his name was Mason. Things took a turn 3 months into the term. It started with sirens. One evening, around 8 p.m., we heard screaming from their house. Not the drunken kind, real, throat-tearing screaming. Then glass shattering. Then a loud crash. Lena called the police while I paced near the front door, heart in my throat. When we stepped outside, blue lights lit the street. One of the guys, mid-20s, shirt torn, covered in blood, sat on the curb, not crying, not shouting, just staring ahead. Another was being cuffed and shoved into the back of a squad car, yelling nonsense. The injured guy kept mumbling things that didn't make sense. "It's her fault," he said. "She whispers in the fridge." He looked at me then. Really looked. His lip cracked, eyes unfocused. "You've got kind eyes," he said. "That's rare. You should keep those safe." I nodded, trying to smile. We thought that was the end of it. It wasn't. I started seeing Mason more often after that. Not talking, just appearing. Outside the shop. At the bus stop. Once, I saw him across the road just standing watching. He never approached. Never spoke. Then one afternoon, I was walking to the shop when he fell into step beside me, like we'd planned to walk together. "Hey," he said. "You all right?" "Yeah," I replied cautiously. "You and I should talk sometime," he said after a pause. "Just us." "I've got a lot going on," I mumbled. He stopped walking. I didn't. "That's okay," he called after me. "I'll wait by your place. We'll talk then." I thought he was joking. He wasn't. When I returned 10 minutes later, he and another one of his housemates were sitting on our front steps like they lived there. I didn't go back. I turned around and walked straight to the shop again. Called Ben in a whisper. He wasn't home. I waited for over an hour until they left. After that, I barely left the house. I changed my route to class. I kept my curtains closed. My boyfriend Adil started staying over more often. He lived in halls across town, but he didn't mind the bus ride. I never told him everything. Just said the neighbors were strange. Then came the night I still dream about. It was a Thursday. Adil and I had watched a movie, eaten cheap takeaway, and passed out around 1 a.m. My window was cracked open. It always got stuffy in that room. Around 3 a.m., Adil sat up suddenly. "Nina," he whispered. "Wake up." I blinked, confused. He put a hand gently over my mouth and nodded toward the window. Outside, in the backyard, we heard soft footsteps. Gravel crunching. Then a whisper. Low. Unclear. Then bang. The wooden gate slammed open. I'd tied that gate closed. That sound shouldn't have happened. Then the back door handle started to jiggle. Slowly. Carefully. Like someone testing it. We didn't move. Then a softer sound. The window sliding. Just a fraction. Just enough. Adil jumped up, grabbed my hand. We grabbed our phones, tossed on clothes, and ran barefoot through the front door. I didn't care if I tripped. I just needed to be gone. We called the police from around the corner. When they came, they checked the backyard. They found someone hiding behind the bins. It wasn't Mason. It was one of the other housemates. Mason was found 2 streets away, pretending to be out for a walk. The police didn't say much. Just took statements. Said it was probably drunken mischief. But I've never seen a drunk that careful. That quiet. That patient. After that, I couldn't sleep. I kept waking up at 2 a.m., imagining the sound of the gate. The whisper. The hand on the window. I never opened my curtains again. A few months later, I left early. Told people I missed home. That wasn't the full truth. I couldn't stay on Windmere Lane. I couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just trying to scare us. They were trying to get in. I did not know why. When I was 10, life felt wide and slow. Too slow, if you asked me. Our house sat right at the edge of a sleepy town in western Pennsylvania, surrounded by long hills and dense woods that seemed to stretch forever. The closest neighbor was more than half a mile away. Every day after school, I'd walk home alone, my path winding past sagging fences and thick trees that always seemed to lean in too close. My name's Rachel Merritt, and back then, I lived with my mom and dad in an old white farmhouse on the last curve of Hawthorne Hollow Road. The place had a slanted porch, creaky stairs, and windows that whistled when the wind pushed through too hard. Some people called it peaceful, but to me that peace always had an edge to it because of the house next door. It belonged to a man named Mr. Lorne. I don't remember ever knowing his first name. He was older than my grandparents, with yellow-gray hair and a voice that sounded like gravel. His house was a wreck, boards missing from the porch, yard overgrown with thorny weeds, and every single window sprayed over with white paint, making it impossible to see inside. I hated walking past it, but the worst part, the way he always seemed to be watching. Every school day, after the final bell rang at Willow Grove Elementary, I'd make the 2-mile walk back home. My parents insisted I walk, said it was good for me, and I didn't mind mostly. But those 5 minutes it took to pass Mr. Lorne's house, they were the longest part of the day. "Hey there, Rachel," he'd call from the porch, voice low and slow. It wasn't welcoming. It was heavy, measured, like he was marking it down. I'd keep my eyes ahead, grip my backpack a little tighter, and walk faster. But sometimes he'd step forward like he might follow. "Where you going in such a rush?" he'd ask. "Too busy to say hi." I never answered, just kept moving. One afternoon, I tripped on a cracked bit of sidewalk near his mailbox because I couldn't stop looking at his windows, afraid I'd see a face behind the paint. At dinner that night, I nearly told my parents. But I didn't. I wasn't sure they'd believe me. Or worse, they'd tell me to be polite. "You're quiet tonight," Mom said, cutting up her pork chop. "Everything okay at school?" "Yeah," I mumbled. "Just tired." Dad looked up. "If that guy next door gives you trouble, you come to us. You hear?" I nodded. But inside, I felt that knot tighten. Weeks passed, and the feeling didn't go away. It got worse. Sometimes at night, I'd see a flicker of light through my bedroom curtains. A flashlight, moving around outside. My window was on the second floor, but I could still see it, cutting through the dark like a knife. I never saw a face, just that beam. Then came the night that changed everything. It was summer, the air thick and still. I was lying in bed when I heard a soft thump outside, then another. A rhythm. I knew what it was before I even looked. The ladder. I'd seen it leaning against the side of Mr. Lorne's porch before, but now it was up against my house. I froze. I turned my head, and there he was, his face right outside my window. Inches away, smiling. His teeth were crooked, his lips cracked, and his fingers tapped gently against the glass. Tap, tap, tap. I screamed. I ran straight to my parents' room, tears blinding me as I shouted, "He's at my window! He's at my window!" They ran with flashlights, but the yard was empty. The ladder was gone. No footprints. No light. Just the sound of crickets and the wind in the trees. "Are you sure it wasn't a dream?" Dad asked gently. "It wasn't," I said. "He was there. He was smiling at me." Mom hugged me. Maybe it was a trick of the light. I wanted to scream, but I didn't. A week later, the house next door went up for sale. Mr. Lorne was gone. No one saw him move. No moving truck. No boxes. Just silence. After that, things felt quieter, but I didn't feel better. I started locking my window every night. Twice. I even put a chair in front of it for a while. My parents told me it wasn't necessary, but I didn't care. Eventually, a new family moved in. A couple with 2 kids. They repainted the windows and mowed the yard. The house didn't feel haunted anymore. Not on the outside, anyway. One afternoon, I sat on our porch watching the kids ride bikes in the driveway across the way. The new girl waved at me. I waved back, but something inside me twisted. Relief. And guilt. Because I'd never told anyone the full story. Months later, I found Mom on the porch swing, gazing up at the stars. "Mom," I said, sitting beside her. "Do you remember Mr. Lorne?" She nodded slowly. "Yeah, I do. I never told you everything," I said. He came to my window. She didn't speak right away. Then she said, "I believe you, Rachel. I'm sorry we didn't do more."